Dispatch manager also tells us that while they are getting tips, they're able to pass along to investigators. She says they're also getting bogged down with people calling in with everything from their theories on the case, their opinions about it. Even some are giving their premonitions about the case. She asked that if you do want to call in, that you stop and think first, is this viable, credible? Is it something that an investigator can actually act upon?
She was 84 years old, frail, and running out of time. Then the FBI showed up at Savannah Guthrie's sister's house, walked straight into the garden, and pulled out something nobody saw coming. The moment it was discovered, investigators knew this case would never be the same. The family had been pleading for answers for 2 unbearable weeks. Now, suddenly, they had more than they bargained for. What was found in that garden has shocked the entire world. And once you hear it, you will not be able to stop thinking about it.
It is never too late to do the right thing. And we are here. We believe. And we believe in the essential goodness of every human being.
The circumstances surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance were troubling from the very beginning. According to her family, she did not wander away from home, which can sometimes happen with elderly individuals experiencing cognitive decline. She was not confused or disoriented and did not drive herself somewhere unfamiliar. The family was clear on this point from early on. Nancy was taken. That word carries enormous weight in this context, and the family used it, deliberately. Someone removed her from her home and from her daily life, and as each day passed without any confirmed sighting, the sense of urgency surrounding the case continued to grow. What made the situation particularly critical was Nancy's health. At 84, she was living with a number of serious medical conditions. Her family described her heart as fragile and noted that she was in constant pain. Crucially, she depended on daily medication, not simply to manage discomfort, but to keep her condition stable. Without that medication, every hour that passed represented a real and growing danger to her life. This was not a situation where investigators had the luxury of time. The medical dimension of her disappearance transformed what might otherwise have been a standard missing persons investigation into something far more pressing. Law enforcement, the family, and the public all understood that the clock was running, and it was running fast. Savannah Guthrie, along with her siblings, responded to their mother's disappearance by making a public appeal that was broadcast widely across American media. The video they released was, by most accounts, deeply difficult to watch. Savannah spoke about her mother with a level of emotion that cut through the polished, composed delivery that television audiences are used to seeing from her. She described Nancy as the light of the family's lives, as their beacon, and as someone who held fast to joy regardless of life's circumstances. These were not the words of a television personality reading from a script. They were the words of a daughter who was frightened and desperate. In that appeal, Savannah and her siblings painted a picture of their mother that went well beyond her role as a parent or grandparent. Nancy Guthrie, according to her children, was kind, faithful, loyal, and deeply loving. She was described as funny and spunky, as someone with a sharp mind and a genuine sense of adventure. Her grandchildren, the family said, adored her. They crowded around her and covered her with kisses. She was a devoted friend, someone people turned to for both warmth and wisdom. That portrait of Nancy matters because it reminds anyone following this case that at the center of all the investigative developments and media coverage, there is a real person. A woman who had built a full and meaningful life over 8 decades, and who was now missing from the people who loved her most. Then came the detail that shifted the nature of this case significantly. Reports emerged that a ransom demand had been made. The family acknowledged this publicly, which was itself an unusual step. Families in kidnapping situations are typically advised by law enforcement to keep communications private, to avoid revealing what they know, and to say as little as possible in public settings. The fact that Savannah and her siblings addressed the ransom reports openly and did so in a carefully worded way suggested that they were working closely with federal investigators and that every word of their public statements had been considered with great care. In their response to the reported ransom communication, the family said they had received the message and that they understood. They asked directly for their mother to be returned so that they could celebrate with her. The language was measured and deliberate, not the language of people speaking off the cuff in a moment of panic. Importantly, the family also made clear that they needed proof. They noted that in the modern world, voices and images can be manipulated with relative ease, and that before they could proceed in any meaningful way, they needed confirmation that Nancy was alive and that whoever was contacting them genuinely had her. This was a reasonable and cautious position, and again it pointed to the involvement of experienced law enforcement advisors guiding the family's public communications. Then came the statement that stopped many people in their tracks. Savannah and her siblings said on camera, directly and plainly, that whatever they had received was very valuable to them and that they would pay. In kidnapping cases, this kind of public declaration is extraordinarily rare. The standard advice from agencies like the FBI is to keep all financial discussions entirely private. Making a public statement about willingness to pay is the sort of thing that investigators almost never recommend, because it can complicate negotiations and potentially embolden those responsible. So, why did the family do it? There are two reasonable explanations. The first is that it was part of a deliberate FBI strategy, a calculated move designed to encourage the people responsible to make contact, and in doing so, expose themselves. The second is that the family, after 2 weeks of silence and uncertainty, had reached a point where they were willing to say whatever was necessary to get a response and to keep their mother alive. Both explanations are plausible, and the two are not mutually exclusive. What is clear is that the statement was made, it was heard, and it was the kind of moment that no one watching could easily forget. 2 weeks after Nancy's disappearance, Savannah released a second video. The tone of this one was different from the first. Where the initial appeal had been directed at a specific person or group, this second message had a broader quality to it. Savannah spoke about hope. She said that despite everything, despite the 14 days and the 336 hours that had passed, the family still believed. She also spoke directly to whoever was responsible for her mother's disappearance, not with anger or threats, but with something that surprised many people who were following the case. She offered them a way out. She told them that it was never too late, that no one was beyond redemption, and that doing the right thing remained an option regardless of what had already happened. She said the family believed in the essential goodness of every human being, and she appeared to mean it. Whether that message reached anyone and whether it had any effect remained unknown at that point. What was known was that Nancy Guthrie was still missing, that her family was holding on with everything they had, and that a federal investigation was already well underway, gathering the kind of evidence that would eventually begin to tell a much clearer story about what had happened and who was responsible. While Savannah Guthrie was in front of cameras appealing to the conscience of whoever had taken her mother, federal investigators were doing what they are trained to do. They were working methodically through every location, every connection, and every piece of potential evidence linked to the case. And it was during this phase of the investigation that something emerged which changed the direction of the story entirely. A property connected to Savannah's sister became the focus of significant FBI activity. Agents were observed at the location conducting what appeared to be a formal search operation, and what they removed from that property drew immediate attention from people who were following the case closely. The footage of agents moving in and out of the site, carrying bags and other items, circulated widely and prompted a great deal of speculation about what exactly had been found and what it might mean for the investigation. Among the items removed was a bag containing a pair of gloves. On the surface, this might seem unremarkable. Gloves are ordinary household objects. People own them, use them, store them, and think nothing of it. But in the context of an active federal kidnapping investigation, a pair of gloves is far from ordinary. Gloves are one of the most forensically significant items that investigators can recover from a scene precisely because of what they can retain. The inside surface of a glove, and sometimes the outside as well, can hold skin cells, sweat, hair follicles, and other biological material left behind by whoever wore them. That biological material contains DNA. And DNA in a modern criminal investigation is one of the most powerful tools available to law enforcement. Alongside the gloves, agents were seen removing several other items from the property. These included what appeared to be food bags, a trash bag, and a brown paper bag. To a casual observer, the sight of federal agents carrying out what looked like everyday rubbish from a residential property might have seemed strange, but there is a clear logic to it. Food bags can contain receipts, packaging, or other materials that help establish a timeline of events. A receipt from a shop, for example, can place a specific person at a specific location at a specific time. Trash bags are particularly valuable to investigators because people tend to throw things away when they want to get rid of them, and discarded items often retain evidence that the person disposing of them believed was gone forever. Mail and other correspondence can reveal financial relationships, communications, and connections between individuals that might not be immediately obvious through other means. The FBI's approach in situations like this is to collect broadly first and analyze carefully afterwards. Agents are not looking only for the obvious: a weapon, a written note, something that screams guilt in an immediate and undeniable way. They are looking for the full picture, for the details that, when assembled alongside everything else, begin to form a coherent account of what happened. Every bag removed from that property was potentially another piece of that picture. But it was the DNA evidence that represented the most significant development at this stage of the investigation. It was confirmed that DNA had been recovered from a glove found in the vicinity of Nancy Guthrie's home area. Investigators described this DNA as suspicious, meaning it did not belong to anyone who had a legitimate reason to have been at that location. That is an important distinction. In any home, you expect to find DNA from the people who live there, from regular visitors, from family members. When investigators find DNA that cannot be attributed to any of those people, it raises an immediate question about how it got there and who left it behind. The existence of this suspicious DNA set in motion a process that sits at the heart of modern forensic investigation. The first step is profiling. A DNA sample recovered from evidence is processed in a laboratory to produce what is known as a DNA profile, essentially a genetic fingerprint that is unique to a specific individual. In a high-priority case, this process can move remarkably quickly. Forensic experts familiar with laboratory procedures have indicated that in urgent situations, an initial DNA profile can be produced in approximately 4 hours. Given the profile of this case and the federal resources being directed at it, there is little reason to believe that investigators were waiting longer than necessary for their results. Once a DNA profile has been produced, it is entered into a national database maintained by the FBI known as CODIS, which stands for the Combined DNA Index System. This database holds DNA profiles collected from convicted offenders, from individuals who have been arrested, and from forensic evidence gathered in unsolved cases across the country. When a new profile is entered into the system, it is automatically checked against everything already in the database. If there is a match, investigators receive a name. If there is no match, the search continues through other means. What makes CODIS particularly powerful in a case like this is that it does not only connect known individuals to specific crimes, it also connects separate cases to one another. If the person whose DNA was found on the glove had previously been involved in another crime, even one that was never solved, that connection could surface through the database. This has the potential to significantly broaden the scope of what investigators know and understand about the person they are looking for. There was also reporting around this time suggesting a possible connection to Mexico. Investigators and forensic experts involved in the case noted that the CODIS database had been expanded in recent years to include individuals processed at the United States border. This means that someone who entered the country and was detained or processed by immigration authorities may already have their DNA profile sitting in the system, waiting to be matched. It is a development that reflects how the capabilities of law enforcement have evolved in recent years, and it represents a significant investigative advantage in cases where suspects may have crossed international borders. Beyond the standard database search, investigators in this case also had access to a more advanced form of DNA analysis, known as forensic genealogy, sometimes referred to as SNP-DNA analysis. This is the same technology that was used to identify the Golden State Killer, a case that had gone cold for decades before genetic genealogy finally produced a breakthrough. The principle behind it is straightforward, but the implications are profound. Even if the person who wore the gloves has never been arrested, never had their DNA collected, and has no personal profile anywhere in any criminal database, forensic genealogy can still lead investigators to them. The way it works is through familial searching. Every person shares significant amounts of genetic material with their relatives. Parents, siblings, children, and even more distant relatives like cousins share identifiable genetic markers. If any relative of the person who left DNA on that glove has ever had their profile entered into a database, whether through an arrest, a conviction, or even a consumer genealogy service, then investigators can potentially identify that relative and use their family tree to work backwards towards the individual they are actually looking for. It is a technique that has been described as extraordinarily difficult to evade because it does not depend on the suspect themselves having any prior contact with the justice system. It depends only on someone in their family having done so at some point. Forensic genealogy can also provide investigators with physical information about an unknown suspect derived entirely from their DNA. Hair color, eye color, likely skin tone, and ethnic background can all be inferred from a genetic sample with varying degrees of accuracy. This means that even before a name is identified, investigators may be building a physical profile of the person they are looking for, one that can be used to guide other parts of the investigation. The combination of all of this, the gloves, the DNA, the other items removed from the property, the CODIS database search, and the forensic genealogy analysis, represented a substantial body of evidence at a relatively early stage of the investigation, and it raised questions that had not previously been at the center of the public conversation about this case. Why was evidence of potential significance found at a property connected to a member of Nancy Guthrie's own family? What was the nature of that connection? Was the location used as some kind of staging point, a place where something related to the abduction had occurred or been planned? Or was there another explanation that investigators had not yet made public? These were the questions that were circulating widely at this point, and they were questions without clear answers. The FBI, as is standard practice in active investigations, was not releasing information that might compromise their work or alert anyone involved in the crime to what they knew and where they had found it. But the evidence that had been recovered was already being processed, already being analysed, and already beginning to tell a story. The only question was how quickly that story would come into focus, and what it would reveal when it did. Forensic evidence recovered from a physical location tells one part of a story. But in a modern criminal investigation, particularly one involving an abduction, the physical world is only half of the picture. The other half is digital, and it is in many ways just as revealing. By the time investigators had processed the evidence gathered from the property connected to Savannah's sister, a separate and equally significant track of the investigation was already well underway. This one involved technology that most people encounter every day without giving it a second thought, and it had the potential to be just as decisive as anything found in a laboratory. Cell phones are, in practical terms, tracking devices that people carry willingly. Every time a mobile phone is switched on, it communicates with the nearest available cell tower. It does this constantly, not only when a call is being made or a message is being sent, but simply by virtue of being powered on and connected to a network. Each of those communications is logged. The time, the location of the tower, and the identity of the device are all recorded automatically as part of the normal functioning of the network. Most people are aware of this in a general sense, but few appreciate just how much information those logs actually contain, or how effectively law enforcement can use them. In the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, federal agents requested cell tower data from the 3 major American carriers operating in the area around her home. Those carriers are AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. By pulling data from all 3 simultaneously, investigators were able to capture a far more complete picture of device activity in the relevant area during the relevant time period than they would have been able to obtain from any single provider. Every phone that connected to any of those towers on any of those networks during the window of time that investigators identified as significant was now part of the dataset being examined. The initial net cast by this approach is deliberately wide. That is not a flaw in the method, it is a feature of it. You begin with as much data as possible and then apply a series of filters to progressively narrow your focus. The first filter is geographic. Investigators look at which towers received connections and identify the ones closest to Nancy Guthrie's home. The second filter is temporal. Within that geographic area, they narrow the data down to the specific window of time when her disappearance is believed to have occurred. What remains after those 2 filters are applied is a much smaller set of devices, but still potentially a large one. This is where the more sophisticated element of cell tower analysis comes into play. Cell towers are not simple beacons that broadcast equally in all directions. They are divided into height sectors, with each sector covering a specific arc of the surrounding area. When a phone connects to a tower, the data logged includes not just which tower it connected to, but which sector of that tower received the connection. This effectively tells investigators which direction from the tower the phone was located at the time of connection. That additional layer of information dramatically reduces the geographic area that needs to be considered, narrowing it from a broad circle around a tower to a much more specific segment of that circle. Taking this a step further, investigators can look at devices that appear across multiple towers in sequence, tracing a pattern of movement. If a phone connected to one tower, then another, in a pattern consistent with traveling towards or away from Nancy Guthrie's home during the time of her disappearance, that phone becomes a point of significant interest. The movement pattern itself becomes evidence, independent of any other information about the device or its owner. By cross-referencing the data from all three carriers and mapping out the movement of devices through the area, investigators work towards isolating the smallest possible number of phones that fit the profile they are looking for. The goal, as one retired FBI special agent described it, is to get down to a single device. One phone, one suspect. In a case carrying this level of federal priority, the resources available to pursue that goal are considerable. This is not a local missing persons investigation being handled by an understaffed county department. The full weight of federal law enforcement was directed at this case from an early stage, and that means access to the most sophisticated analytical tools available, as well as the personnel and processing power to use them effectively. The digital noose, to borrow a phrase that captures the nature of this kind of investigation well, was tightening from the moment the case was escalated to the federal level. When you step back and consider the full scope of what investigators were working with at this point, the picture that emerges is a substantial one. On the forensic side, there was DNA evidence recovered from a glove found near Nancy Guthrie's home, identified as suspicious and already being processed through the CODIS database. There was the additional possibility of forensic genealogy analysis, capable of identifying a suspect even without a direct database match, by working through family connections and building outward from any relative who had ever had contact with the criminal justice system. There were the other items removed from the property connected to Savannah's sister, each potentially containing additional evidence in the form of receipts, correspondence, or discarded materials. And on the digital side, there was a growing body of cell tower data from three major networks, being refined and filtered with the aim of isolating the specific device or devices associated with whoever was responsible. That combination of investigative tools reflects how profoundly criminal investigation has changed in recent decades. The popular image of detective work built on witness interviews, physical searches, and the occasional dramatic breakthrough is still part of the reality, but it sits alongside a layer of scientific and technological capability that would have seemed extraordinary not long ago. DNA profiling that can be completed in hours. Genealogical analysis that can trace a suspect through their family tree across generations. Cell tower data that can reconstruct the movements of every phone in a given area on a given day. These are not future capabilities, they are present realities being applied in active investigations right now. For whoever was responsible for taking Nancy Guthrie, this represented a deeply unfavorable set of circumstances. The assumption that a crime can be committed and the perpetrator can simply disappear has always been more fragile than people who act on it tend to realize. But in 2026, with the tools available to a federal investigation of this profile, that assumption becomes almost untenable. DNA does not fade the way memories do. Cell tower records do not become uncertain over time the way eyewitness accounts can. The data was already collected. The samples were already in the laboratory. The databases were already running their comparisons. And none of that process required anything further from the public, from the media, or even from the investigators who were waiting on results. It was simply a matter of time. Throughout all of this, the Guthrie family continued to speak publicly, and the tone of what they said reflected people who were in a state of sustained, exhausting uncertainty, but who had not given in to despair. Savannah Guthrie, in particular, demonstrated a kind of composure that many people found remarkable, given what she was going through. 14 days after her mother was taken. She was still in front of cameras, still articulate, still anchored in something that kept her from falling apart entirely. She spoke about hope, she spoke about belief, and she spoke directly to her mother, not to the television audience, not to the investigators, but to Nancy herself, as if the distance between them could somehow be bridged by the force of a daughter's love carried through a camera lens. She told her mother that she was strong. She said that everyone was looking for her, everywhere. She said that the family would not rest. Those are simple sentences, but they carry an enormous amount of weight when you understand the context in which they were spoken. This was not a performance. This was a person at the outer edge of what human beings can endure, holding on because the alternative was unthinkable. What the family perhaps drew some comfort from, even if they could not speak about it in detail publicly, was the knowledge that the investigation had already produced real, tangible results. Evidence had been found. Forensic processes were in motion. Digital data was being analyzed. The investigators working this case were not starting from nothing. They were building on a foundation of physical and digital evidence that piece by piece was narrowing the field of possibilities and closing the distance between the unknown and the known. Nancy Guthrie was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, a woman who had given a great deal to the people around her over the course of 84 years. She had raised children who, by any measure, grew into people of substance and strength. She had built friendships that endured. She had been, in the words of her family, a beacon, a source of joy and stability for everyone whose life she touched. The idea that a woman of that description was somewhere out there, separated from the people who loved her, dependent on medication she did not have access to, was the kind of thought that the public found genuinely difficult to sit with. And that discomfort translated into attention, and attention translated into pressure. And pressure of the kind generated by a case this visible does not dissipate easily. The science was working. The technology was working. And a family was waiting, holding on to hope with everything they had, trusting that the answer was coming, and that when it arrived, it would bring Nancy home.